Bedside nursing is no longer the Florence Nightingale fairy tale that we all once believed existed. The purpose of my speech will be to inform my audience of the stresses and abuse involved in bedside nursing. In my experience, I have worked in the emergency room for 7 years. In that tenure, I've held many different positions. I've been a medical scribe alongside the physicians, I've worked as the ER unit secretary, and currently I am a nurse tech intern in the emergency room. So it goes without saying, I've witnessed the abuse on a first-hand basis. It happens every single day. When you think of medical emergencies, you think of a nurse rendering aid and trying to provide life-saving support to someone in need. However, oftentimes that task can be jeopardized if the respect is not reciprocated. A nurse should never be hit on, spit on, or spoken down to for trying to provide that support, but that happens on a daily basis. I will address the verbal, physical, and emotional abuse that happens to bedside nurses with little to no repercussions to their abusers. Verbal abuse is any type of abuse where you're spoken down to and you're constantly receiving derogatory comments from someone. Workplace violence is not just the heinous crimes that we see reported on the news. It's often that little comment, those little remarks that are verbal abuse, as reported by JCO from the Sentinel Event Alert. Many times, the small comments can be dismissed. We can let it go. However, the abuse still weighs heavily. Being called out of your name or spoken down to repeatedly is a form of verbal abuse. How difficult would it be for you to work at your job if you were constantly abused on a daily basis? For me, I'd be out of there. I'm not coming back. I don't want any part of this. Oftentimes, more than not, that's not the case for nurses. They feel like that is their only option. If you think that the verbal abuse is crazy, wait until I tell you that nurses are even physically abused. Physically abused. How can someone who's providing care to another human being be physically abused? The article Workplace Violence Against Nurses, a narrative review from the National Library of Medicine states that according to WHO, between 8 and 38% of nurses will endure some type of physical abuse throughout their career. There should never be an instant where a nurse is punched in the face and she has to continue to render aid to that patient. However, that happens more often than not. There are little to no repercussions for the actions of those abusers. That means if the nurse is struck in the face or she's being choked out and there's a combative patient, she still has to render aid to that patient regardless of the circumstance. Otherwise, it's considered patient abuse. And what do I mean by just little to no repercussions? I mean that in some instances, the patient can be escorted off the premises. In other scenarios, perhaps they're going to be trespassed from the facility. But what does that mean exactly? Because according to law, anyone in the need of medical screening is entitled to that medical screening regardless. So are you catching my gist? Can you see how all this kind of leads to the emotional abuse that these nurses have to endure? In their career choice, they're not protected, but yet they're abused. Enduring the constant verbal and physical abuse can lead to a turmoil of emotional abuse. According to Supplemental Healthcare, an article addressing workplace violence and abuse against nurses states that the nurse abuse contributes to adverse psychological conditions and significant reduction in nurse job satisfaction. There's little to no resources that protect nurses. The plans in place to provide safety often fail, leaving these nurses with nowhere to go and nowhere to turn to. They're instead fearing to retaliate in fear of losing their job. Emotional abuse constitutes any type of behavior that is meant to bring fear. For me, it all brings fear. Fear of what's to come, fear of what's to happen next, fear of what's going to happen to bedside nursing. It makes you wonder, what's the real reason for the shortage of bedside nursing? Is it the abuse that they're having to endure? Are they finally at their wits' end? Is this their breaking point? Bedside nursing is a career that requires much thought and dedication before choosing to put yourself in this situation where more times, often than not, you're probably going to endure this abuse. Never give nor take an excuse. Florence Nightingale, the prestigious nurse that we all aspired to be like, said that herself. And it just makes me wonder, how would Florence Nightingale be tolerating the abuse now? Would it be the same?